The Iraqi Premier Nouri al-Maliki emerges as the biggest winner in the country's legislative elections, but falls short of an overall majority. Putin orders the withdrawal of Russian troops following drills in regions bordering Ukraine. And Libya descends further into chaos as heavy fighting between rival militias engulfs the country's major cities. Hello there, you're watching AEE TV World News, and I'm Fatima Basim. The results of the first post-occupation parliamentary elections in Iraq have been released, and as early opinion polls predicted, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is set to win a third term in office after his State of Law coalition won the highest number of seats in the country's legislature.
Following weeks of ballot counting, the Iraqi Electoral Commission finally announced the results of the country's parliamentary elections. And as expected, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, the head of the State of Law coalition, has triumphed. Maliki himself won upwards of 721,000 personal votes, by far the highest such figure nationwide, helping his case for a third term in office.
Baghdad City, number of votes 2,819,000. Number of seats 69. Seats won by women 17. Votes for the State of Law coalition 1,074,609. Names 1. Nouri Kamil Muhammad Hassan Maliki. Number of votes for 721,782.
Although Maliki failed to win an overall majority, his coalition won 95 out of 328 parliamentary seats. In second place, the Al-Ahrar bloc won 34 seats. The Citizens bloc also won 31 seats. The Al-Wataniya won a total of 21 seats, while the Muttahidun party received a total of 23 seats. As for the Kurds, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan won 19 seats in parliament, while the Kurdish Democratic Party secured another 19 seats. The Movement for Change won 9 seats. The Al-Iraqiyya Al-Arabiya bloc received 10 seats. And finally, the Al-Islah movement won only 6 seats. Following the announcement of those preliminary results, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki issued a statement congratulating his State of Law coalition while calling for cooperation between the rival political factions.
I want to congratulate those who have won in the parliamentary elections. I want to congratulate the State of Law coalition's major victory, which is a sign of confidence, but at the same time a huge responsibility. This victory was not based only on the campaigning, but also on what you were able to provide in the previous parliament. You were elected to continue the path towards reform and stability. I hope that you will continue with your hard work, from meeting the needs of the people, to participating in parliament, to pushing for unity in the government.
On the 30th of April, millions of Iraqis headed to the polls to choose from over 9,000 candidates, vying for 328 seats in parliament. The elections were the first since the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the country in late 2011 and were hailed as a success in the face of a militant insurgency trying to derail the political process. Nevertheless, Iraq's politicians still have to overcome one final hurdle. Regardless of the final results, the government formation process is expected to take months, as the various parties are likely to seek an all-encompassing package, including the selection of the president and the Speaker of Parliament. Although the vote was an important milestone in Iraq's fragile state, the new government will now have the tough task of resolving the country's severe political crisis, tackling chronic poverty and a violent militant insurgency which have been plaguing the country for years.
Political analyst Basim Abu Tawikh joins us now from our Beirut studios. Mr. Abu Tawikh, why do you think Iraqis voted Maliki's state of coalition most?
Thank you. Actually, at the beginning, I just tried to mention something which is from the Iraqi history. In the 1958 till 1968 is about 10 years. We have several upheaval, which is changes of government by force. But from that time, the Saddam regime ruled the country for over 30 years, and we couldn't get rid of him. Only by 33 coalition countries come invaded Iraq and get rid of the last regime. At the moment, we are actually in the third term of the election. We are exchanging the government peacefully and by the Purple Revolution. 9,000 Iraqi people voted. Member of the parliament will be Iraqi people will vote only for 328. 320, which is the actual number of the Iraqi parliament. 8 members will be 5 of them given to the Christian, which is minority, and 1 to the Yazidi group, 1 to the Mandai, which is a Sabia religious, and 1 to the Shabak tribe. All these to be fair for all the population in Iraq. Also, Iraq actually is heading forward. The changes, everybody, each group have a heading, and their propaganda in the election was to be forwarding and hoping to be changes in the Iraqi to rebuild and bring prosperity to Iraqi people. The only unity group, which is a state of law. Since the last election, they never have any division, anybody left them, they are still unity. This is why they have the chance, the Iraqi people also, they have a program which is the majority politics government. Iraqi went and vote for them, yes.
Yeah, so what's Maliki's next move? Will he be able to secure a majority to rule Iraq for a third time?
To be honest, by law is okay, but also there is no majority winner in the group. But the St. Lego, a new technique in a new law in the election in Iraq is a different type of election, which is they give chances to the small group to have a chance to have more seated in the parliament. Iraqi is not a Maliki decide or government decide. Iraqi is a parliament country. The parliament need to be have a member 50 plus or 2/3 of the parliament. If they fail, they have 50 plus, which is 165 member of parliament to vote for the prime minister and the chairman and the president of Iraq. That means the parliament who decide everything for Iraq, not the government decide. That means Al-Maliki, his group, which is state of law, or any other group in Iraq, is good to have these members and these numbers to go before they went to parliament, before they enter in the parliament. They have to have a formal agreement who's going to be in one package. Yes.
Yes, and will other Iraqi politicians be willing to form a coalition with him? We know that he has made a lot of rivals in his second term.
I think a copy paste of the last coalition, it won't be working anymore, because the Iraqi fed up the propaganda which is Al-Maliki made in his campaign for the election, which is a majority politics government. Majority politics government means, doesn't mean, which is a Shia in Iraq. They had about 178 member, which is enough to form by self. They form a government, which is the national coalition in Iraq. But Al-Maliki mentioned before the election what is meaning of the politics, majority politics government. Actually, he's create an idea. That means the Kurdish will be involved, the Sunni, unfortunately to name Sunni or Shia, but this is what happened in Iraq. This is what St. Lego election law in Iraq bring to Iraq. Because if you see it, hold the map in Iraq, no one group can get vote from all over the country. Al-Maliki, his vote from 10 cities in Iraq, not in the 18th city. That means the Iraqi being divided and being by each group have their name. This is why I'm naming those three. That means state of law and the Kurdish group, either of them, they are three, which is they rule in the Kurdistan, northern Iraq, and Sunni. they able to make the majority and go to the parliament and form the government. That will be easy, which is they having a strong parliament members to vote for the government to support them for the fourth year will be have no problem. That means Iraqi will be built. Or there is actually blackmail from other small group, which is, I don't know, they come up with the idea. It doesn't mean the al-Maliki is going to rule, which is actually, it doesn't accept that, because by democracy, al-Maliki he's the popular person, even his group, he's the most member of seat they have in his state of law. If they going to have election between the national coalition, al-Maliki will win. If they have even they vote for all the member, which is from the big group, which is state of law is a big group. I don't know what the foundation or what the base they're going to have in the national coalition. Either it's going to be same as before or it's going to be different. But I believe al-Maliki will go ahead with the majority politics government, yes.
Yes, but will the Kurds be in Iraq's next government, given that Masoud Barzani recently threatened to leave?
This is actually, you see, by every election we had these negative voices. You know, they raise the voice to get more extra benefit. This is the Iraq. This is the democracy in Iraq. Unfortunately, some people they said we are not getting our rights. Some people they said we are leaving because of the budget. They blackmail the central government. This is a shame on them. But what we can do, this is the parliament is what they create to us, and same people they put them in the latest election. Yes.
All right, political analyst Bassem Abu Dhabi, thank you for speaking to Ali Tija.
Thank you.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered an end to military drills near the border with Ukraine while calling on Kiev to pull back its troops from the east. However, NATO has voiced its doubts over Russia's withdrawal from the Ukrainian border.
Russian soldiers conducting military exercises near the Ukrainian border have been ordered back to their positions, as President Vladimir Putin ended the country's annual drills just days ahead of Ukraine's presidential elections. The Kremlin issued a statement saying, due to the end of the planned spring training of troops that included their movement to Rostov, Belgorod, and the Bryansk regions, the Russian president ordered troops participating in the drills to return to their permanent bases. Moscow called on Kiev to follow suit, demanding an immediate end to the quote punitive operation and violent actions of Ukrainian troops fighting pro-Russian activists in the east. NATO, however, expressed skepticism that Russia has withdrawn its troops from the border with Ukraine.
Now I think it's the third Putin statement on withdrawal of Russian troops, but so far we haven't seen any withdrawal at all. I strongly regret that because a withdrawal of Russian troops would be a first important contribution to de-escalating the crisis.
But then again, NATO's definition of evidence is questionable. Earlier this year, Moscow belied NATO after it claimed that it possessed images allegedly showing a buildup of Russian troops near the Ukrainian border by proving that they were taken during a 2013 military exercise. Meanwhile, NATO is conducting military drills of its own in Eastern Europe, which have sparked tensions since the West-East conflict began to play out on the Ukrainian arena.
Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Moscow's ties with the European Union and NATO need to be re-examined in light of the deteriorating situation in Ukraine. During a joint press conference with his Slovak counterpart, Lavrov also outlined his country's views on the best way to de-escalate the crisis.
A significant rethinking of our relations is necessary. We are trying to conduct such analysis with NATO and the EU as to what needs to be done to bring our relations in line with existing documents. Obviously, the first step is to cease the military operation, and the OSCE mission representatives in Ukraine who are based close to the battle zone should take up the initiative and act as mediators to discuss the steps to de-escalate the situation.
Well, as the West points the finger of blame at Russia, accusing it of meddling in the Ukraine crisis, German media has revealed the presence of American mercenaries in eastern Ukraine, fighting alongside troops loyal to Kiev.
This is eastern Ukraine, but these are neither Ukrainian forces nor pro-Russian activists. According to Germany's Federal Intelligence Agency BND, these are mercenaries from the notorious private American company formerly known as Blackwater. They were last seen in March when this video uploaded on YouTube showed men dressed in US-style military outfits running through the streets of the Ukrainian city of Donetsk with guns and bulletproof body gear. According to the German newspaper Der Spiegel, some 400 mercenaries from the newly dubbed Academy Security Company are currently on the ground near the eastern Ukrainian city of Luhansk. They are reportedly involved in the army's operations against pro-Russian activists. Based on the BND's assessments, the U.S. intelligence services had prior information about the covert involvement of their mercenaries in the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. Blackwater, whose members stand accused of war crimes in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, was founded in 1997 with the aim of conducting acts of espionage and military operations in crisis-hit regions across the world. The allegations come in line with recent Russian accusations of U.S. complicity in Ukraine's military assault in the east.
As Russian President Vladimir Putin prepares to head to China for what is expected to be a historic trip, Moscow and Beijing look set to sign a record number of deals that will breed a new phase in the partnership.
A partnership that he describes as exemplary is to be given an even more solidifying boost. Russian leader Vladimir Putin's visit to Shanghai could usher in a new era of mutual cooperation between the two international powerhouses. Prior to his trip, President Putin praised the hospitable neighbor and said that bilateral ties between Russia and China have reached a high level of strategic alliance. Putin went on to explain how a $60 billion agreement on energy would benefit both countries. The agreements on the export of Russian natural gas to China are in a high degree of readiness. They will mean diversification of pipeline routes of gas supply for Russia and will help our Chinese partners reduce their energy deficit and boost environmental security by using pure fuel. On the busy agenda, special attention will be made to economy and trade. Both areas are due to generate more than $100 billion by 2015. Through this, the two major powers will be able to reduce dependence on external markets through widening the scope of investments. We are working actively to reduce dependence of bilateral trade on external market conditions. Therefore, in order to develop a trade and economic cooperation, we pay particular attention to the breakthrough areas such as environmental protection, production of drugs and medical equipment, developing new information technologies, as well as in nuclear energy and outer space. Russia's envoy to China summed up Tuesday's trip as intensive, while observers claim it will not be anything short of historic. One certain feature of this journey to the Far East is the amount of deals Moscow and Beijing will sign, which will be unprecedented.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Attorney General filed charges against 5 members of the Chinese military unit for allegedly spying on American companies, vowing to ramp up the fight against hacking. According to the Department of Justice, the military hackers conspired to steal information that would be useful to Chinese companies, including state-owned corporations in the nuclear and metal sectors. For its part, the Chinese Foreign Ministry condemned the accusation, stating that it will damage mutual trust between the two nations.
when a foreign nation uses military or intelligence resources and tools against an American executive or corporation to obtain trade secrets or sensitive business information for the benefit of its state-owned companies, we must say enough is enough. This administration will not tolerate actions by any nation that seeks to illegally sabotage American companies and undermine the integrity of fair competition in the operation of the free market. This case should serve as a wake-up call to the seriousness of the ongoing cyber threat. These criminal charges represent a groundbreaking step forward in addressing that threat. This indictment makes clear that state actors who engage in economic espionage, even over the internet from faraway places like offices in Shanghai, will be exposed for their criminal conduct and sought for apprehension and prosecution in an American court of law.
Libya is edging closer towards a full-blown civil war as lawlessness descended over the country's two largest cities. This as al-Qaeda-linked militias deployed in the capital Tripoli amid a deteriorating security situation and the interim government's inability to restore order.
Al-Qaeda-linked militias have arrived in the Libyan capital Tripoli to apparently restore order in the wake of Sunday's attack on the country's parliament by forces loyal to renegade General Khalifa Haftar. On Monday, the security situation took a turn for the worse, with an Al-Qaeda-inspired group threatening to retaliate against the troops of the former general, who has vowed to rid the country from Islamist militants. Earlier in the day, violence escalated further as unknown attackers fired rockets at Benina Airport, in Libya's second-largest city of Benghazi. Authorities had already closed the airbase for security reasons. Meanwhile, the Libyan government proposed an initiative aimed at saving the country from plunging into civil war, calling on the disputed parliament to go into recess. The government plea comes a day after the GNC was attacked by armed groups demanding its dissolution and after General Haftar launched an offensive targeting Islamists in Benghazi on Friday. General Mukhtar Fernana, speaking on behalf of Haftar's group, said it had assigned a 60-member constituent assembly to take over for parliament.
We announced the freezing of operations of the General National Congress. It will no longer play a role in any matters dealing with the sovereignty of our nation, its legislation or administrative matters.
Haftar unleashed a so-called National Army on Islamist militiamen in Benghazi, leading to the death of at least 79 people and injuring more than 100. The Libyan government has been struggling to assert control over the country since the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi, with the latest violence serving as yet another indication that Libya is becoming a failed state.
As the violence in Libya escalates, Saudi Arabia closed its embassy in Tripoli and evacuated all its diplomats over security concerns in the country. According to the Saudi ambassador to Libya, Mohammed Mahmoud Al-Ali, the kingdom also closed its consulate in the North African country before flying out all of its diplomats. The Saudi ambassador added that the mission will reopen when the situation stabilizes. African affairs expert Ayo Johnson joins us now via Skype from London. Ayo, where is the situation in Libya heading to?
Well, it's heading for disaster, really. A civil war likely ensuing, a country that's lost its way since Gaddafi was ousted. We've had repeated prime ministers, nearly 3. We've had a parliament that's not been able to make any legislation, and we have militias on the ground who have too many ammunition, who control too much sway of the land and are literally dictating the pace as they see it. What we have is chaos, a parliament that can't organize itself, a militia group that way too many of them have ammunition and are taking the law into their own hands.
Yes, will General Haftar be able to launch a coup on the government?
Well, a coup is what it looks like. His objectives have been that he wants to rid of the country of militants. He wants to rid of parliament of Islamists, as he sees it, and he can't take the law into his own hands. And that's what he's been doing. And this leads to parliament not being able to govern effectively. The prime minister becomes disabled, and a country is hijacked virtually in the hands of these generals, who many of them are now controlling large swathes of the land with a lot of ammunition and a lot of men who follow them as well.
But the country has always been in a state of chaos since Gaddafi's ouster. What's the real solution for Libya? Is it division?
Well, absolutely not division. I mean, Libya has always got to be one Libya. Division would only spell disaster. But the problem is the status quo over the last few years, more so over the last few months, cannot continue. You can't have parliament which is meant to legislate, parliament that's meant to govern, a prime minister that's elected. But when you have militias that can take the law into their own hands, it makes this situation very complex. And ultimately, you are looking at the verge of a civil war with these militias going face to face, toe to toe with the established army, if there's any bits of it left. And ultimately, the Americans, the Europeans, many of them who support the very weak government, would have to send in their troops, if at all they are prepared to go toe to toe with the general and some of his men.
So what do you think the government's next move should be?
Well, the government is in total chaos and collapse right now because they don't sway, they don't control the upper ground, they don't dictate the pace of events. That, on the other hand, is being dictated by some of the generals who control the land, who control the ammunition, who control a lot of the military capabilities. And to that extent, the government is a sitting duck, a lame duck, unable to govern, unable to deliver for the people. And ultimately, it's Libyans themselves, many of them who are looking at these events, worried, concerned, who are struggling, who are going to suffer.
Yes, we know that some diplomats have pulled out and even energy companies have halted their work. Do you think that we're going to see international involvement in trying to stabilize the situation in the oil-rich country?
Well, one thing is for sure is that we didn't get to this stage by mistake. We didn't get to this junction by chance. This was a decision that was made by the West when they went with NATO to take out Gaddafi, unknowing to themselves that Gaddafi was the man who was keeping the country together. And what we have now is chaos. So the responsibilities lie with the West. The responsibilities lie with the so-called international community, of which the West is paramount. Ultimately, Libya's failure or success moving forward will be determined by the West. I would expect the West to apply some stiff sanctions. I would expect them to take this to the Security Council. I would expect for the multinational companies on the ground who want to mine Libya's precious minerals, unable to do so, would ask for their supportive governments to help. The question is, does the world, or does the international community, or does the West have the appetite for yet another war? And which would only suggest that they've failed miserably with ousting a president back in Gaddafi back in the day, and are not realizing the ramifications for that change.
All right, African Affairs expert Ayo Johnson, thank you for speaking to Ali Tijah.
Thank you.
You're watching Ali Tijah World News, still to come. The death toll in Syria exceeds 160,000 people. We'll have more on that story when we return. Welcome back to Early Tijah World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Iraqi Premier Nouri al-Maliki emerges as the biggest winner in the country's legislative elections, but falls short of an overall majority. Putin orders the withdrawal of Russian troops following drills in regions bordering Ukraine. And Libya descends further into chaos as heavy fighting between rival militias engulfs the country's major cities. Israeli and American armed forces have kicked off joint military exercises dubbed Juniper Cobra. The drills will include thousands of troops and several missile defense systems.
Some 1,000 U.S. troops from the United States European Command have been deployed to the Israeli entity to take part in joint military drills, dubbed Juniper Cobra, with their Israeli counterparts. The Zionist regime claims the 5-day drill is aimed at preparing the Israelis for military responses to missile attacks against it. Israeli missile systems of Iron Dome, a short-range missile interceptor, David Sling medium range, and the Arrow long range are to be tested in the exercise. The 3 missile systems have been either jointly developed or financed by the United States. The Israeli daily Haaretz reported that 2 U.S. warships stationed at the Mediterranean Sea will also take part in the military maneuver. The ships are equipped with the technology used to intercept missiles. The drill is being held a week after the U.S. Secretary of Defense visited the Israeli entity. During the 2-day trip, Chuck Hagel reviewed preparations for the maneuver.
The United States' continued commitment.
Hagel said that the exercise will employ Israel's entire rocket and ballistic missile architecture, including Iron Dome, Arrow, and David Sling, assets that the United States is proud to have helped Israel finance and develop, adding that the exercise is the largest drill for U.S. troops under the European Command. However, analysts suggest that these latest military exercises are aimed at further destabilizing an already fragile region.
According to the latest figures released by the opposition-backed Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, more than 162,000 people have been killed in Syria since the conflict broke out in March of 2011. The figure reflects the country's persistent bloodletting that appears no closer to being halted.
Over 3 years have passed and the Syrian conflict is as fierce as ever, with relentless militant groups determined to prolong the fighting for as long as possible, in part to protect their newly found interests of arms and drug trafficking. The pro-opposition Britain-based monitoring group, which relies on a network of spies on the ground, said that it had documented the deaths of 162,402 people. The figure includes civilians, foreign-backed militants, as well as members of the Syrian military. Of the 162,402 people that the observatory said have died in the conflict so far, about 1/3, or 53,978, are civilians. Meanwhile, 26,858 militant fighters have been killed. Analysts, however, argue that the observatory considers civilians who fought against the government a part of the civilian death toll, which renders the opposition fighters' overall number of deaths impossible to verify. For its part, the Syrian army does not publicize the number of its casualties, but the observatory claims that a total of 37,685 members of the military have also been killed. From among the foreigners and other fighters who have sided with the militants, 13,529 were killed, including members of al-Qaeda-linked groups and other hardline Islamist factions. There are also 2,891 unidentified bodies in the conflict. The UN has stopped updating its own tally of the Syrian dead, saying it can no longer verify the sources of information. The organization's last count in late July stood at 100,000 dead. The figures are based on the names of those killed, collected by informants working for the observatory, who document the dead in hospitals, morgues, and identify them from video material. The involvement of some hardline foreign fighters, mainly the extreme Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, has further inflamed the conflict in Syria. In addition, bickering among the opposition's exiled politicians who make up the so-called Syrian National Coalition has eroded any hope for an end to the crisis in the near future, which has driven nearly a third of the country's population from their homes.
Clashes broke out between Saudi-backed Bahraini security forces and anti-government protesters during a funeral procession held for a slain youth west of the capital, Manama.
Mourning is in its simplest sense synonymous with grief over the death of someone, except in the dictionary of Bahraini regime forces, who on many occasions have attacked funeral processions in which the bereaved have also become the victims. Here in the village of Sitra, southeast of the capital Manama, thousands of mourners held candles as they marched in the funeral procession of Ali Faisal al-Akrawi, a young man killed during an anti-regime protest on Friday. Meanwhile, Saudi-backed regime forces fired tear gas and burnt shotguns at the mourners, leaving many severely injured. Al-Akrawi is believed to have been hiding following an absentia prison sentence of 10 years for his alleged role in protests against the Al-Khalifa regime. Scores of Bahrainis have been killed and hundreds of others injured and arrested across the country, which is said to be supported by a number of Western countries, particularly the United States and Britain, despite its appalling human rights record. More than 100 activists have been killed and thousands of others injured or arrested since the beginning of the uprising in 2011, without suppressing the voices of those who are demanding democratic reforms in the kingdom.
Venezuela has said that a formal complaint against the U.S. will be filed to the UN and other international organizations. The Venezuelan foreign minister said that Washington's meddling in his country's political crisis violates the UN Charter and that the government has a comprehensive file with statements of interference with U.S. President Barack Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry. Thai anti-government protesters have vowed to step up pressure to remove the acting Prime Minister and install a new administration. This comes as the interim Premier met with senators in a bid to resolve the protracted political crisis.
Thailand's acting prime minister held talks with senators in a bid to resolve the prolonged political unrest gripping the country. Meanwhile, anti-government protesters continue to camp out in the capital Bangkok, calling for the ouster of the new prime minister and the installment of a new government.
I don't think that they can continue in their posts because they can't govern the country. The government should show more responsibility for the sake of the country.
Protesters are expected to stage mass rallies in the upcoming days. However, their leader Sethap Thugsben stated if his final push in a 6-month fight did not succeed, he would surrender to authorities on May 27th.
If Suthep turns himself in, we are all willing to turn ourselves in as well. We'll take the blame as well.
Thailand has been caught in a political limbo following the dismissal of Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra and 9 of her ministers on May 7th by a court which found them guilty of abuse of power. Remaining cabinet members selected the commerce minister to replace Yingluck, yet anti-government protesters say this was done illegally, demanding that the minister be replaced. The opposition have set numerous deadlines for the government to step down in recent months and issued many ultimatums to little effect. Amid deadly violence, which has left 28 people dead since November, the escalation of the crisis is now plunging Thailand to a potential political showdown unless both sides agree to compromise.
4 people, including a 12-year-old girl, have been killed in a suicide blast in the northern Nigerian city of Kano. The explosion was caused by a bomb that was placed in a car and also resulted in the injury of another 5 people. Eyewitnesses said the vehicle was left in the middle of the neighborhood and its driver left on a motorbike. The attack was blamed on the Boko Haram group, which has been active in the area. Mali's Prime Minister Moussa Mara announced that the country was at war with terrorists in the northern city of Kidal after clashes between separatist militants and the government forces left 36 people dead.
8 soldiers and 28 insurgents were killed in fighting over the weekend outside the regional governor's offices during a visit by Mali's Prime Minister Moussa Mara to the desert town of Kidal, adding that around 30 civil servants were being held hostage. Mali's PM said that terrorists have declared war on Mali and that his government will, quote, mobilize its resources to fight this war. The government has blamed the clashes on Tuareg separatists, but added that Islamist groups had taken advantage of the crisis to infiltrate Kidal in order to, quote, participate in the chaos alongside other terrorist groups. Kidal, 1,500 kilometers northeast of Mali's capital Bamako, was the scene of anti-government protests by hundreds of demonstrators on Friday and Saturday. Mara visited the desert caravan town of Timbuktu on Friday, Kidal on Saturday, and was due to spend 2 days in Gao, northern Mali's largest city, but cut the final leg short to return to Bamako a day earlier for urgent talks with President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Security for the tour has been provided by the United Nations MINUSMA peacekeeping force and soldiers from Operation Serval, the French-led military mission against Islamist militants in northern Mali. It was not immediately clear if French troops had been involved in events in Kidal over the weekend. The country descended into chaos in January 2012 when separatists launched a string of Tuareg insurgencies in the north. A subsequent coup in Bamako led to unrest, and armed Islamist radicals linked to Al-Qaeda overpowered the Tuareg to seize control of Mali's northern half. A foreign-led military operation launched in January 2013 ousted the extremists, but sporadic attacks have continued, with the Tuareg demand for autonomy remaining unresolved.
The US Navy is turning seawater into fuel, as scientists at the US Naval Research Lab have been able to extract CO2 and hydrogen from the ocean and repackage it in the form of fuel that could one day power the Navy's fleet.
Scientists at the Navy's research lab outside Washington, D.C. seem to have figured out a way to make fuel from seawater. The U.S. Navy uses an estimated 1.3 billion gallons of fuel each year to run its global operations. The fuel consumed is not only expensive, it's environmentally damaging and being derived from oil.
Well, it is a game changer potentially for the Navy or commercial entities, because you can make fuel potentially where and when you need it. So that eliminates the logistic tails that you have for delivering fuel long distances to our fleet.
The idea of turning water into fuel has intrigued scientists for decades, but experts in the U.S. Navy say the idea is becoming a reality. The fuel has already been proven to work on a much smaller scale.
We've made strides in getting CO2 specifically out of seawater and hydrogen simultaneously with the technologies that we've developed. And then we've been actually able to show that we can recombine CO2 and hydrogen in the laboratory on a laboratory scale into a liquid type fuel.
Scientists, however, admit that making the giant leap to power an aircraft carrier using seawater will take some doing. Over the next few years, researchers will focus on using the seawater to power larger engines and making it more efficient.
The next president of the European Commission will have to work hard to appeal to many EU residents who have grown largely unconcerned during the economic crisis.
After 10 years at the helm of the European Commission, Jose Manuel Barroso is stepping down at the coming elections, leaving behind a mixed legacy.
Mr. Barroso and the Commission have been, I would say, very timid in their handling of the economic and social crisis. That is what we hold against them, and caused the rise in Euroscepticism. So we need to revive the European institutions and the Commission.
In trying to tackle the crisis, Brussels gave itself new powers and applied tough austerity measures on several member states, leaving citizens feeling more detached from the EU.
You
have to be deaf and blind not to see that the European Union, in one of its main institutions, the Commission, is mistrusted, and I think more and more so.
But the European Commission President works with all the heads of state and other European institutions to be able to forge a consensual solution.
José Manuel Barroso m'a raconté un jour qu'il se sente.
Jose Manuel Barroso told me one day that he felt like a controller in an air traffic tower. I found this image significant. He told me that what he does is avoid air crashes. There are flights everywhere, and he is trying to stop any accidents.
Partout, ce qu'il me faut, c'est éviter qu'il y ait un accident.
All the candidates are trying to show that they will lead a stronger and bolder European Commission that will get Europe back on its feet.
The Commission is a dynamic element that can reinforce the Europe that has been built and provide solutions for the unemployment problem. That will be the main challenge of the new Commission.
Whoever becomes the next European Commission President will be sworn in by the Parliament in mid-July and assume his duties in mid-October.
All right, here's a recap of tonight's top stories. The Iraqi Premier Nouri al-Maliki emerges as the biggest winner in the country's legislative elections, but falls short of an overall majority. Putin orders the withdrawal of Russian troops following drills in regions bordering Ukraine. And Libya descends further into chaos as heavy fighting between rival militias engulfs the country's major cities. Well, that's all from me and the Ali Shijah News team. Thank you very much for watching and good night.